Well, for more on this story, we're joined by our business editor, Kate Moody, and by former president of the European Central Bank, Jean-Claude Trichet. Thank you for stopping in.
Pleasure.
Is it the G20 or is it the G2 that we're about to see?
Well, I hope that it is a G20, but of course, this quarrel between China and the US is terrible. It's part of the protectionist move of the United States, which is very, very bad for I would say, global mood, for global confidence. And part of the slowing down of the global economy that we see is coming out of this shadow that the U.S. is projecting on the rest of the world.
So you pin the blame on the United States?
Oh, yes, because the U.S. Had this move against absolutely all other partners. Remember, it started also with Mexico, Canada, China, of course, but even the European, the allies are on board for this quarreling. So it's very grave. It's very dangerous, in my opinion. It is something which is backed by a large part of the population in the U.S. and maybe in other advanced economies. So we have a real problem which we should not consider as, I would say, only due to President Trump, by the way.
Now, about a month ago, you said that these two leaders of the world's two largest economies, you didn't think they were stupid enough to allow this trade dispute to escalate into a catastrophe. We're 2 days away from this big meeting. Do you still hold that view?
Well, we are still not in the catastrophic hypothesis. But everything is possible, frankly speaking. And I could see, of course, what Minister Mnuchin said. According to the 90% of the accord, which is already negotiated, we will see. I hope that Secretary Mnuchin is right, but I'm not sure that he's right.
The stakes, of course, are incredibly high for both leaders, though, because each of them have something to prove to their domestic base.
Yes, indeed. But of course, this quarrel on trade is part of something which is much bigger, which is the geopolitical relationship between the present dominant power and maybe the future equivalent power very soon. And that is, of course, something which goes not only in the direction of, in the dimension of trade, but also in the dimension of technology. We have Huawei, which is a very, very problem, and also the military and geostrategic influence.
So is Donald Trump, to a certain degree, right to challenge China on issues like whether or not there is a national security problem when it comes to Huawei?
I think I don't comment myself because you have to know the file from that, I would say, security standpoint and implicitly military standpoint. So it's what is absolutely sure is that we are moving in a world where the relationship between the big powers will be totally different, and some kind of accord has to be found out. It's clear that for the U.S. it's a major problem, again, not only trade, but all the rest of it. For China, it's also important, it seems to me, to organize its own increase of power, increase of influence in the best way possible. Both have an interest to organize the transition over the next 10, 20 years.
But has Donald Trump flagged something that we haven't been paying enough attention to? Two of France's big telecoms carriers, they're doing business with Huawei. Should we be taking a second look at security?
Again, I don't want to pronounce myself on the security dimension. I think it's up to the countries concerned, certainly up to the UK, to Germany, to France, to Italy, to Spain, to see exactly where we stand ourselves, taking into account our own interests, which are not the US interest, and of course not the Chinese interest. But again, this is a small part of the problem, and it's a symbolic illustration of the real technological problem that we have.
Even though it has grown in importance over the past 6 months or so. But More broadly speaking, do you think that Donald Trump does he have a point when he tries to renegotiate with China? Some of his criticisms about things like intellectual property rights, about businesses not being able to set up in China, they're criticisms that have been repeated across the Western world. Is it just his tactics that you think are perhaps misguided?
No. I think there is a point, of course, for having a good agreement with China, which would take into account everything, including, as you said, all aspects of FDIs, which has to be absolutely clear. The issue of the state-owned enterprises, which is also a real problem for all the West, because we don't have the same concept of enterprise in our own economies. And of course, you have, as you said, the very, very important protection of patents, protection of our own inventions. And that is very important. It seems to me that there is matter for having a deal with China. What I don't like, of course, is to embark on tous azimuts, as the French would say, all azimuts, in all directions, to make the promotion of protectionism, which is more or less what I see, whatever is the partner. And that is very bad. And one of the reasons why it is very bad for the European in particular is that we are more open than the US in terms of trade. When you add up export plus import on the proportion of GDP, you have 50% in Europe, in the European Union, with the UK or without the UK, the same. And you have 27% in the US. So we are much more vulnerable to a rise of protectionism than the US themselves are.
Do you think that this is a turning point for the global multilateral trading system that we've known for decades?
Undoubtedly, it's a turning point, not only for the multilateral trading system, but for multilateralism as a whole. We need a new multilateralism. The US themselves, in this new world, are bizarrely dismantling the old multilateralism, which was more or less organized around them. So we have a new multipolar world, and we need to be very, very keen on having multilateralism in that new world.
Because think back to the very first G20, 2008, it's in Washington, D.C., it's in reaction to the financial crisis. 85% of the world's wealth is in those 20 nations, and they all come together. How did it come undone?
Well, first of all, it still exists, first. Second, it did a very good job. At the moment of the Asian crisis, it was the very moment of the creation. I was there myself. I could see when the President of the United States came, and it was a very, very important meeting, of course. Then we had the crisis, most recent crisis of 07, 08, 09, 10, and the G20 did a very, very good job. So it is irreplaceable, frankly speaking. And of course, we have these new challenges, a lot of challenges that would have come anyway. And this particular position of the United States, which is very, very complex, because you have the personal element of President Trump itself, but also the fact that in the advanced economy, there is a sentiment of uneasiness vis-à-vis globalization, vis-à-vis trade,
inequality
in the past. Of course, inequality. By the way, the G20 will look at many, many issues, not only the trade issue, as you know. They will look at aging of the population, which is a big, big problem for Japan. They will look also, of course, at technology and the digitalization of the world. They will have and financial stability, I hope, because we still have a world which remains very vulnerable from the stability, financial stability, and economic stability standpoint.
Jean-Claude Trichet, former president of the European Central Bank. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well
Thank you.
Kate Moody, who will be back with the rest of the day's business news later on.